You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another fact-filled episode of Haunted Histories here, exclusively on Parasearch Radio, with yours truly, host and presenter and self-confessed history geek, Penny G. Morgan. Last week, we spoke with the lovely Danny of Ghostly Goings On about Aldwych Tube Station. If you didn't get a chance to listen to the show, please do go and catch up with it on YouTube or the Spreaker page, as this is one place, Aldwych, that doesn't get investigated very often, and due to the ever-increasing concerns relating to health and safety, may never allow any public investigations ever again. Saying that, though, after the show went out, a good paranormal pal of mine, I mean that she's into the paranormal, not that she is paranormal, but that would be cool, wouldn't it? Cara Ford contacted me to say that she got the chance to go into Aldwych once, and she agreed with me about how the ticket area is so beautifully kept. It does seem to be frozen in time. She said, what with the old lifts and the winding stairs that never seem to stop. She said it almost feels as though everyone has left just before you get there. It had that kind of vibe. Made me wonder about residual energy, the sort of maybe the fingerprint of it that it's left, as opposed to there's stuff still going on. Like it's almost sort of left some kind of energy behind, but who knows. But they had activity on the platforms with references to it actually having been a shelter in World War II, which I know we discussed last week, and having a strong male presence. She said that the most amazing thing were the intelligent responses to questions that were being asked. The one that really shocked them was Cara's other half had bright red trainers on. So they asked what colour shoes he was wearing. A very clear voice came back with red. Julian, Cara's partner, is pretty sceptical, and that even amazed him. In the train carriage that you can go on, she said you could actually hear movement on the platform, but there was no one there. And similar to what Danny actually mentioned about REM pods and things going off, their REM pod went off a few times when they were all on the carriage. In other words, when nobody was near it. Apparently, the Transport for London staff that were there supervising were really confused and did double-check to make sure no one had got in. They also assured them, and this is actually something I asked Danny, if you remember the show last week, about rats potentially setting off the REM pods. Apparently, and this is very interesting, the tunnels have been blocked to prevent them getting in and nesting. The fact that the tunnels have been blocked also makes Danny's experience of the whoosh feeling you get when a tube comes into the station all the more interesting, because if the tunnels are blocked, how could an actual tube on one of maybe the adjoining stations like Holborn still create that whoosh effect if it was coming into that station and they felt it on the platform at Aldwych when we were talking last week? Bit of a conundrum, eh? In the second tunnel, the one that Danny had mentioned was a lot more ominous. Cara and the group she was with experienced the full paranormal gamut of noises, light sensors being triggered, unexplained shadows, and also intelligent K2 responses from a boy named Peter, who had been separated from his mum during an air raid when the doors were shut, due to the tunnels being at capacity. All I can say, Cara, is wow, that sounds amazing. Sounds like an amazing experience. It's just a shame that London Transport don't allow investigations of some of these ghost stations. I think we should start a petition to allow certain people in. I'll take that one. I'll take the bullet and be one of the first to be allowed in. But, or we can either do that, do a petition, or if anyone knows Sadiq Khan or Mike Brown, who's the Commissioner for Transport for London, have a word with them. Tell them, we'll be careful. But, for the sake of paranormal research, I think it should be done. Anyway, in all seriousness, tonight we're talking with friend to the show, Gemma Snow of Fright Nights, Cambridgeshire, about a place you've probably never even heard of, called Hinchingbrooke House in Huntingdon. But when I start talking about some of the people associated with the place, you'll probably start to realise its significance, especially its historical significance. We'll discuss the background of the house a bit more with Gemma, because she knows it well. But as a sort of a brief summary, it was originally a priory built in around 1200 or thereabouts. When the last prioress was dying, the man who was responsible for the dissolution of the monasteries for Henry VIII, one Thomas Cromwell, the Earl of Essex, came to take possession. Now, what was interesting in this was that the Cromwells were quite a well-known family in the Cambridge-Huntingdon area of the UK, and it would actually be relatives of Cromwell who would take over this property in 1538. One Richard Williams, in fact, who was actually known as Richard Cromwell, as his father, please keep up with me here, had been married to Catherine Cromwell, whose father was the aforementioned Thomas Cromwell. Are you with me? It's a bit confusing, isn't it? Well, Hinchingbrooke as a property stayed in the Cromwell family until the spendthrift, a trait which definitely seemed to run through the family, Sir Oliver Cromwell entertained just a little bit too much and earned just a little bit too little, and had to sell the property to one Sir Sidney Montague. This began the ownership of the Montague family. But back to the Cromwells. Most people with an interest in history have heard of Oliver Cromwell. Most people who don't even have an interest in history have probably heard of Cromwell, just didn't necessarily realise how many of them there were. Well, Oliver Cromwell was the same Oliver Cromwell who led the parliamentarian troops in the Civil War against Charles I from 1642 to 1649, where Charles was executed. It was actually Oliver Cromwell's uncle, and this is where it gets a bit confusing, Sir Oliver Cromwell, who owned the house at this point. Oliver, the politician, his family had not inherited, this is not Sir Oliver, this is Oliver the politician, had not inherited a great deal when the senior Cromwell, who had first taken over Hinchingbrooke, being Richard Cromwell, if you remember, had died. And therefore Oliver Cromwell had lived quite a modest life, as opposed to his uncle up the road, who had lived in a very, very large home with lots of land and lots of partying and entertaining of royalty. It's hard to actually explain without going into it for an incredibly long while and probably boring you just a wee bit what caused Cromwell to rebel against the monarchy that members of his extended family had so enthusiastically entertained over the years, as without the input of Henry VIII and his sort of using of Thomas Cromwell for the dissolution of the monasteries, etc., Hinchingbrooke would never even have been owned by the Cromwells. That said, Henry did decide to execute Thomas Cromwell in 1540, blaming him for his disastrous betrothal to Anne of Cleves. But as Henry was wont to do, he did regret it later and decided to blame everyone else for bullying him into it, or persuading him into it, shall we say. There you go. You can't really stick someone's head back on once you've chopped it off, but I think Henry didn't realise that. Oliver, the politician Oliver, had been converted to a faith of a very, very strong puritanical value, and found that the popish ceremonies of the church were unbearable to him. He is even believed to have said that a bishop was the enemies of God, his truth. He was also known to preach his religious beliefs, the puritanical Protestant beliefs, illegally, and he took this stance into account. and he decided to stand for Parliament. He became a very visible and somewhat, you might say, volatile Member of Parliament in 1640. Now, interestingly enough, some of the things he actually demanded you can look at and think were quite reasonable, because he demanded that things such as an actual annual calling of Parliament, because at this time it was only called as and when the monarchy saw fit. The country wasn't run the same way that a country is run now, and whether you agree with Parliament or not is by the by. But those officials are, in theory, elected, whereas back in these days, the monarchy ruled absolute. It was an absolute monarchy, so they could decide not to call Parliament. Parliament was literally there just to do their bidding, as opposed to running the country. And Oliver did actually want Parliament called by law every single year. He also wanted Home Defence to be transferred from the King to officers appointed by Parliament. In other words, I suppose you could call it a Ministry of Defence, I suppose you could say. Unsurprisingly, this did start to cause some unrest, and is possibly what descended the country into civil war. Even though this war ended with the beheading of a king and quite a radical change to the running of the country, there was actually only ever 3 major battles, albeit quite a lot of smaller skirmishes in between. We had Edgehill in October 1642, Marston Moor in July 1644, and Naseby in June 1645. Edgehill being the first major battle, Marston Moor being the largest, and Naseby being the decider. In 1649, Cromwell was actually sent to Ireland to place it firmly under the control of the British and to take lands from what they perceived as the rebels. This resulted in nearly 40% of land to be sequestered from Catholics to British Protestants. His first gift to the people of Ireland was to storm Drogheda near Dublin and kill over 2,500 men of arms. Hundreds more were killed too, including Catholic priests, friars, officers, and 1 in 10 common soldiers, all of these being clubbed to death, as was actually allowed under the rules of war back then. When he returned, Cromwell became Lord Protector from 1653 to 1658. His son Richard took over for a further year after his death, but wasn't as good as his father. And ironically, this was probably as close to being king as you could get. But Cromwell's story, interestingly, didn't end with his death from natural causes in 1658. In fact, they actually believe he died from septicemia caused by a urine infection, would you believe? 12 years after the execution of Charles I, the king who was on the throne at the time of the Civil War, Cromwell's body is meant to have been exhumed from Westminster Abbey, hung in chains at Tyburn, and then thrown into a pit, with his severed head placed on a pole outside Westminster Hall until 1685. There's even proof that people purchased his head, and his head was sold on as a souvenir as time went on. Although people do question as to whether it was in fact Cromwell whose body was displayed, but nevertheless you cannot disregard the intent by royalists to humiliate and gain some kind of royal revenge on the man himself. That much is very evident. So, was Oliver Cromwell a hero or a criminal? Should he be revered or hated? That's something for you to decide, as he could be seen to blame for British suspicion regarding anyone with a kind of, I suppose, all-encompassing religious enthusiasm. And he definitely escalated the long-term instability of Ireland and the persecution of Catholics there by an English colonial elite. However, he did come up with some absolutely amazing plans, and his naval and military reforms probably did underpin the future successes of the British forces. He championed religious liberty and the ability to worship whichever religion you chose, and not the one dictated to you by the monarch. You just have to look at how Elizabeth I's sister, Queen Mary, or Bloody Mary, as she is known, killed Protestants with a fervour that was bloodlust in its extreme. In her short 5-year reign, over 280 were burned at the stake for being Protestant. At least Cromwell's rebellion showed the monarchy that there was room for all. So, interestingly enough, here we have a family, who on one hand kowtowed down to royalty, giving them everything they wanted, causing the family to ultimately go broke in order to keep up appearances, but on the other hand, someone who was willing to put his head above the parapet and fight for what he believed in. If I'm completely honest, I actually don't know what I think about it all. It's up to you to decide. But it would be interesting to see if any of this conflicting approach to life and such like is actually evident in the hall. If you're interested in little sound bites of history, the owners of Hinchingbrooke after the Cromwells, the Montagues, who I mentioned earlier, well, they had quite an interesting time of it as well, but that would take us probably about another half an hour before we got to Gemma. But they were actually related to the writer Samuel Pepys. Yes, the same diarist who buried his Parmesan cheese in his garden during the 1666 Great Fire of London. There was also a grammar school in the grounds, which is now the Cromwell Museum. And that was attended by Pepys also. And yes, you guessed it, Oliver Cromwell. Shall we start talking to Gemma now and hear a bit more about her experiences of Hinchingbrooke House? And we're back. You heard me sort of ranting on about about Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell, and whether I think he was a criminal or not, and we can obviously discuss that in the chat room if people feel so inclined. But I think now we're talking to Gemma, we can actually talk a little bit more about Hinchingbrooke House. Hi, Gemma.
Hi, Penny.
How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. It's nice to talk to you again, because we haven't talked for a while, have we?
No, it's been a while.
It has been a while. I think it was Kelvin and Hatch was our last one, and I've been lucky enough to investigate it since then. And yeah, I think we might be doing a revisit there at some point. But how's it going with Fright Nights Cambridgeshire? You busy? You got lots on?
Yeah, I got lots on. Got some events coming up over the next couple of months. We're at Oliver Cromwell's house this Saturday, actually.
Okay.
So that's in Ely. That's a really good place.
Okay.
And we have our Halloween event on Cromer Pier.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't know Cromer Pier had a paranormal history.
We are going to the theatre at the end of the pier. There's the theatre and the lifeboat house. And the theatre is supposedly haunted. So,
okay.
So that should be an
just
interesting...
watch out for seagulls in Cromer.
Seagulls.
The seagulls. The seagulls are quite vicious in Cromer. Don't walk around with food in your hand.
I'll watch my chips.
Oh, definitely watch your chips. No, seriously, there's signs up saying do not eat chips on the front.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The seagulls, they've had to try and cull them. It's
okay.
Have you got anything
about?
Hopefully not at night, but you never know. If they smell, those chips do taste nice in Cromer, and they smell good as well. So have you got anything sort of new to Fright Nights coming up?
We have got a haunted weekend in Colchester, which is early next year, and there's 2 new venues part of the weekend. We're going to be having ghost hunt in 3 different venues: the Town Hall, Colchester Castle, which we've been to before, and Holly Trees Museum, which is next door to the castle.
Yeah. Isn't that beautiful Georgian-looking building, isn't it, that's next to the castle? It's
absolutely beautiful, and supposedly the most haunted of the 3 venues.
Oh, right.
So that will be quite an interesting weekend, and it actually includes bed and breakfast at the Brook Red Lion Hotel, which is one of the
also
oldest...
meant to be haunted as well, isn't it? The Red Lion.
It's one of the oldest hotels in Colchester, and they have three known ghosts to appear there that have appeared for many years. So,
wow. And how many days is this over, Gemma?
This is from a Friday evening and finishes on the Sunday morning.
Wow, sounds like a good weekend. And you've got all the details on your Facebook page for anyone who wants to go and have a look into it.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Now, one of the things that some people have sort of said to me, not people who run companies like Fright, Cambridgeshire, but people who go on these kind of investigations, is it always seems to be the same places that groups go to every single time. Yeah. I know you and I have discussed this.
Yes.
Is there any exciting new possibilities coming up for 2018 that are quite unique?
We have got a handful of new locations that are in the pipeline. We're in talks with, and they will be available to book next year. So I'm not going to mention any names.
Don't want to jinx it.
No.
Oh, but these are kind of virgin territories, or the ones that they aren't very well known. Well, they're well known as having histories, but not well known as being
not well investigated. So yes, so that should.
So keep an eye on the page, and you'll be announcing them as and when they get booked.
Yes.
And these are all in the sort of East Anglia
region,
in the
East Anglia area.
Essex, Suffolk, Norfolk, Cambridgeshire, all these kind of places.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
I'm intrigued. Well, actually, I'll let anyone listening in on a little secret. I do know about some of these, but I'm not allowed to tell you on sworn to secrecy. But they are very exciting. So if you trust me, do look at Fright Nights Cambridgeshire Facebook page, because these places are there. I would say they're going to sell quite quickly, and I've already put my name down for all of them. So there you go. There you go. So you've got, well, that might make you not want to come, the fact that I'm going to be there, but my name is definitely down for them, because they're going to be interesting. And no, you will not get out of me where they are, because I'll take the secrets to the grave. But it's exciting times ahead, I would say, wouldn't you?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Brilliant.
It's going to be a good year, 2018.
Isn't it just? It sounds it. I'm going to have a busy para-hangover type year, I think, by the sounds of all the places that are coming up. But anyway, I'm going to keep Red Bull and Haribo in business for the next 12 months.
You'll be buzzing.
I will. Yeah, I will. People wonder what I'm on. No, just Red Bull and Haribo. So, Hinchingbrooke House. I know this is one when we did our original show on Kelvin and Hatch that you mentioned as being one of your favourite locations. Remind us why you like it so much. Describe it to us.
Hinchingbrooke House it's absolutely beautiful. It's a stunning house. It's really grand, and it's lovely grounds. And there's just so much history there.
Yeah,
it's so exciting just to go there and spend the evening in a house that's got so much history, and it's just wonderful. And I love the feeling you get when you go in the house.
Yeah. So it's not it's a very nice place to be. It's not a. Do you ever feel? I mean, looking at its history, it's not got a nasty history to it or anything like that, really.
No.
I mean, there are a few deaths that have been associated with it, not so much actually there, but I know there was one of the Montagues who had he had a mistress because I think his wife was declared insane or something, and he took a 17-year-old mistress, and I believe she was murdered a few years later and things, but not actually in the property. She was murdered in
outside the Opera House.
Yeah, in Covent Garden. Yeah.
Martha, yes.
But it's not itself as a place got a sort of a nasty history to it.
No.
I know it was originally a church and a priory on the site.
Yeah.
Wasn't? Yeah. Is there any evidence still there of the priory? Is there any of the original building still there from when it was a priory, sort of pre-1500s?
Well, the house that's there now was built with the stones from the priory.
Oh, right, okay. So you've still got that energy from when it was a religious...
You've still got that energy, yeah, and you can still see parts of the original wall. And there, I don't know if you know about the skeletons that are underneath the staircase.
No.
Well,
Tell me more.
Well, they had a fire and they were uncovered when they rebuilt part of the house. And the coffin, they're stone coffins, and you can see them now. They've not been touched, and they're underneath the staircase, and they're covered with a glass panel. Mm-hmm. Now the coffins don't have their lids anymore, so it's unknown what happened to the lids of the coffins, whether or not they were taken off or moved.
Right.
When they rebuilt this part of the house. And it was thought for many, many years that they were the skeletons of 2 of the Benedictine nuns.
Right.
But they did actually have a look at the bones more recently, and it's a man and a lady. Mm. And they know the ages of the man and they were in their 40s.
Right.
And they don't know who they are, but it apparently is quite unusual for a man and a woman to be together in a coffin.
Because isn't there a story that there's a bridge or something there that's meant to be haunted at Hinchingbrooke? It's meant to be haunted by a nun or something.
They call it Nun's Bridge, yes.
Right.
And a nun has been, the ghost of a nun is seen underneath the bridge.
And is in the rumour that she had a monk as a lover, and that they were both murdered or something?
It's unknown if it was murder or suicide, but she came off the bridge. She came to a sticky end.
So how high up is the bridge then? Is it quite a long way up?
It's quite a long way up.
Right.
And it's actually got a little distance from the house. You've got to jump over a fence into the country park to be able to see the bridge.
Right.
But this is where people for many years have been seeing the ghost of a nun underneath this bridge. And we do actually go out into the grounds of Hinchingbrooke House. Right. And it's also said that the nuns are buried in the grounds of Hinchingbrooke House.
Oh.
And that there is evidence of bodies being in the grounds, but whether or not the nuns are there, it's unknown. But it's possible.
I mean, it wouldn't be unusual if as it was a priory for it to have had consecrated ground. That if a nun died whilst serving God, they were then buried in the consecrated ground attaching to where they lived. But that bridge thing, one of the interesting things I found out, is mainly couples who's supposed to see the ghost.
Yes, that's true, yes.
Which I think is quite an interesting one.
Yeah.
So obviously it was a priory to begin with. Then during the, when King Henry decided that he didn't want churches and everything else, it was sold to the Cromwells, which is quite...
It became a family home, yes.
Which is quite ironic considering the fact that the person who was in charge of all that was a Cromwell as well, but anyway.
Yes.
What sort of experiences have people had there to sort of make you think that maybe the Cromwells are still around? Or even the Montagues, for that matter.
Well, I've had lots of quite significant things happen in the house. We've had poltergeist activity in there, and I've had things happen in that house that I'm really surprised about, and I can't explain. We've had poltergeist activity on different occasions, on different investigations. We've had a book fly off the shelf in the library, and there's a room. It's just called the reception room, and it's got like a Romeo and Juliet style balcony. It's a lovely little room. It's got quite a nice feeling in this room. On two occasions we've had the table in this room lift off the ground.
Right.
And the table in the room, it's a heavy table. It's about 8 foot long. And the first time it happened, we'd gone into the room on a vigil with maybe 8 people. We'd just entered the room, and it was almost like the floor had been pushed up, and everybody felt it. And the table lifted up off the floor and came back down onto the ground again.
Right.
And it happened again. It happened again later on in the evening at the end of the night, and the whole group were in this little room. There was about 30 people in this small room. And actually there was a group doing glass divination on the table, and the glass was moving round really, really fast. And because it's such a big table, there were a couple of people leaning across the table, so their body weight was on the table. There were people sitting on the floor, people sitting on the chairs at the back.
Right.
And the same thing happened again, and the table jumped up off the ground.
Right.
And the people sitting on the floor said it felt like the floor had been pushed up.
Right.
So whether we had some mini earthquakes that night, I'm not sure, but it was very, very unusual, very strange. And I have no explanation for it at all.
Has it been reported happening there ever before?
No, never.
Okay.
Never.
And so did you have any sort of other equipment going to see if you caught anything out? So, if you caught some kind of communication telling you what was going on?
At that time, no, we didn't. That was on one of our earlier investigations, and we didn't catch it on camera. It's a real shame.
And how big was this table?
It's about 8 foot. We did try and recreate it, and you had to have a person standing at each corner of the table to lift it up, because it's really heavy. So yeah, it's very strange.
And what room was this in again?
That was in the reception room, and it is in one of the older parts of the house.
Right.
And there is a room above it that used to be used as a nursery. And people have had weird feelings up in the room above.
Right. Okay.
But again, not a nasty feeling. It's generally quite a happy place.
Yeah.
The only place that people do seem to get negative feeling is in the Wendy house in the grounds.
Right.
And that's the house that they purpose built for one of the ladies of the house, and I believe that was the wife of John Montague, who ended up in the mental home.
The one who took the 17-year-old mistress, Martha Ray. That
one. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, let's hold that thought. We're just going to have a quick 30-second break.
Okay.
And then we're going to come back and carry on talking about the Wendy house. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
Just 30 seconds, everyone. Harry
Hello.
Price.
Harry Price here. Good evening. If there's nothing myself and everybody else enjoy here on the other side more is the sit back and relax and listen to Parasearch Radio with its paranormal news, views and reviews from across the UK and beyond. Make sure to find out more about them on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web, whatever they are, to keep up to date with all their broadcasts throughout the week. And I hope you enjoy them as much as we do over here. Hello? Is anybody there?
Okay. Right, so we were just talking about the Wendy house with Gemma of Fright Nights, Cambridgeshire, that was built in the grounds of Hinchingbrooke House. And Gemma was saying it was actually for the wife of one of the Montague Earls who lived there, his wife actually was mentally ill. And it took a while, but she was actually, I believe, hospitalised with it eventually. So you're saying this Wendy house people get a lot of weird vibes from?
Yes, yeah.
What kind of things have happened there?
People feel uncomfortable, they feel negative, they feel sad.
Right.
They feel sick. And it's quite interesting because that area there is where we get a lot of really good readings with the K2 meter, and there's no electricity out there.
Mm-hmm. So was this Wendy house, is it literally like a mini house that she could sort of almost do whatever, almost treat as if it was her own house, and she could keep tidy up and clean, and
yeah,
that's what it was there for?
It's very small. That's what it was there for. It was just a room. Right. So if you were being shut away in there, then I think you'd feel quite isolated. Mm. And it is that, yeah, there is a strange feeling in there. There's also a lot of spiders in there.
Okay.
So I remember the first time going in there and looking up, and that was a mistake because the ceiling there were lots of great big black spiders, and I actually put the hood up on my coat.
So have you caught any EVPs or anything like that in there?
We not in there, but have caught EVP in the cellar of the house.
Okay. And what would the cellar have been used for? Just storage, or did it have any kind of nefarious purposes?
Well, there is a tunnel that goes under the town, okay. And the tunnel was the entrance to this tunnel is supposed to have started at Hinchingbrooke House and gone all the way to the centre of the town, to the town hall. Mm-hmm. Now it's been bricked up.
Right.
So I don't know what the cellar was used for. I don't know if it was used for storage, but there was certainly at some point it was used to access the tunnel.
I wonder if it was something to do with the Civil War, because although, depending when it was built, obviously it's Oliver Cromwell, as in not Sir Oliver Cromwell, but Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector, was obviously very anti-Catholicism, was very anti the Royalists and everything else.
Yeah.
But Sir Oliver Cromwell and then Edward Montague were actually Royalists.
Yes.
So, and I know that I think it was Edward Montague who was actually helped in restoring Charles II to the throne. So I wonder if it was some way of helping royals or Catholics or whatever escape. Who knows? How interesting. So what sort of stuff have you got down in the cellar?
We've had table tipping down there. Mm-hmm. Had glass divination it works really well down there. We've caught EVPs down there. Caught singing.
Well, that's an interesting one. The reason you mentioned that, because Martha Ray, who we mentioned earlier, she was actually a singer, and the place was infamous when she was living there, because she was with him for about 12 years because they had about 4 or 5 children, and it was infamous for having musical soirees and things with her singing, because she used to sing all the time.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting. Okay. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah. I'm
racking your brains now, aren't you?
Yes, I can't think of anything else that we've had down there at the moment.
Okay. So is there any part of the house or the grounds that you find intimidating?
Well, maybe not intimidating, but it's quite the entrance to the house between the gatehouse and the front entrance into Hinchingbrooke House.
Mm-hmm.
There's a grassy area.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been to Hinchingbrooke House a few times now. I've been going there for the last 3 years, and I've had different mediums come on every event that I've held at the house.
Okay.
It's just, and every medium that I've worked with on the night has picked up on the same thing in that space between the gatehouse that came from Ramsey Abbey and the front of the house. They've picked up on a young guard that walks up and down. Now, I wouldn't. He doesn't like people walking on his grass. That's the message that comes through. He's quite shouty. Maybe not intimidating, but he said, "Get off my grass," and that's come through at every different medium that I've had.
And there's no chance those mediums have talked to each other?
No, there's no chance those mediums have talked to each other. No, absolutely not.
Okay.
And it's not something that I've talked about. It's not. I haven't put that on the website, or it's not in the write-up for the event. Okay. And that's just something that I know. So that's something I've always found really interesting. There's a young guard who protects the front of the house.
But you're saying that the gatehouse part actually came from an abbey?
Yes, it did. Came from Ramsey Abbey. Yeah.
Okay. So you could have anything sort of linked to the stones.
Yes.
From that as well. Definitely. Interesting. And have the mediums been able to describe sort of what era maybe they think this guard is from, like his attire, what he's wearing, what?
Young, in his early 20s, just in a dark uniform.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Makes you wonder sort of because obviously the house has got such a long history, and it's been occupied as a family home for 400 years. It's got a lot of different periods of time it could have gone through when they did actually want to have a guard or looking after it, or a member of staff, or could even be a gardener, I suppose. Saying
it could
get
just
off my
be
grass.
A groundsman.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But,
Okay. So that's the bit that you sort of you like you're just saying there's been repeated experiences on. Are there any bits that your guests have picked up on that have really interested you? Are there any experiences your guests have had? I mean, we've mentioned about this big table lifting a couple of times, which is pretty amazing. The book that threw itself out of the library.
Yeah.
Did that go towards anyone in particular, or is it just almost like an attention-seeking thing?
That was we were having a group séance, and the medium asked for something to be thrown, and the book came off the shelf.
So it got thrown on command?
Yes. Yeah.
And do you know what the book was about? What particular book it was?
It was a book by Bach.
Okay.
Yeah.
As in the composer, Bach?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got that music link again?
Yeah.
And there was no way it could have moved on its own?
No, I don't believe so. No.
Okay.
It came right off the shelf into the room.
Huh. Okay. So, did any other experiences that guests have sort of really resonate, really mean something?
Well, I was always interested from my original visit to the house, and I had an experience when I walked around. I walked around with the lady, and we came back down to the front of the house, and I said I was going to go back and take a few more photographs. And she went off. She said, "That's fine, take your time." And she walked off towards the front entrance, and I walked back to the staircase to go up to the house. And I heard a man's voice very clearly. And I'd assumed that somebody had come into the house and was chatting to the lady. So I carried on going around the house, and I finished, and I came back down, and there wasn't anybody with her. And I mentioned this, and I said, did somebody come into the house? And she said no, and she'd been standing by the entrance the whole time. So that was my first experience of the house. And then when I hosted the first event there, a lot of the people that came were local, and they'd come because they'd been to school there, or they'd had some kind of connection with the house, or they'd heard the story about Nuns Bridge. And actually it was quite interesting. Some of them, did have some interesting stories. And one of the gentlemen there, he had gone to school there in the 70s, and he was friends with the caretaker's son. And in the holidays, they had stolen the keys and gone into the house, and they were sitting at the bottom of the staircase near where the coffins are, and they heard what sounded like footsteps above their heads coming along the corridor towards the staircase.
Right.
And I think they probably thought at the time, "Oh, we've been busted, there's somebody in here." So they just sat there quietly, and the footsteps came closer towards the staircase, really heavy footsteps, and started descending the staircase. And they look up, and there's nobody there.
And how old were the kids? How old were they?
They were probably early teenagers.
Okay. And that'll teach you to steal some keys.
they ran out, and they never stole the keys ever again.
I tell you something, caretakers are brilliant people to get the stories from. They just know everything about the properties that they're in. They're amazing to get the stories from.
And they'll always say at the end of the night that they wouldn't want to spend the night in the place.
Yeah, I know, they're great to get these stories from.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you're looking at a prison, whether you're looking at an old school, whether you're looking at a stately home. The caretaker is the best one to interview if you can, to get the stories from. They're amazing. So having these kind of real sort of experiences and stuff, I think are invaluable when you talk to people who know the place. You can actually even tell you some of the rumours that surround it and everything else. One of the other links that we know there is to Hinchingbrooke is the infamous diarist Samuel Pepys.
Yes.
Now you told me an interesting fact, that something about a wall there.
Yes, the wall that's outside the house is called Pepys Walk, because that's where he walked up and down to gather his thoughts. And so it's named after him. Yes.
I know he is meant to have stayed there quite a lot, and he used to.
Yes.
He did used to talk about Hinchingbrooke and his cousin Edward Montague in his diaries and his publications. So he did have quite a strong, and I think he even went to the grammar school that was on the site. Isn't that where the Cromwell Museum is now? Or
where the Cromwell Museum is, yes.
He went to the grammar school, so he's got it's amazing really when you start looking into these places, the links to other famous people that you don't necessarily think about. Someone like Samuel Pepys, most people have heard of, even if they don't know what he's sort of famous for, they've heard of him. Same with Cromwell. It's still quite amazing to think Cromwell has been such a common political name in the history, sort of over a 200-300 year period. with Hinchingbrooke, I mean, you've mentioned that the sort of the driveway, if you like, from the gatehouse to thing is there's something there. Whether who it is or what it is, he just doesn't want
it's
you.
unknown at the moment.
Going on his grass.
Yeah.
Are there any parts of the building that you would quite happily spend the night in, on your own?
I would. I would quite like to spend the night in the house alone, and I think if I was going to stay in the house, probably it would be in the library.
Okay. Where the book was thrown at you all.
Where the book was thrown, yes, and we've had other things happen in there. On one occasion, we had a torch coming on as a yes answer.
That's one of my dream experiences to have.
And it was absolutely fantastic. It was really, really, that happened in the library. So I like the room. I think it's wonderful. I like the Great Bay window.
Yeah.
And it's just.
Are you a bookworm though? Are you a bookworm, Gemma?
I do like to have a read, yes, when I have the time.
That's probably why, because I like libraries too, because I love books. And those kind of big window seats in the big windows and stuff. We were talking about one of the castles I used to visit as a child when I was younger, and the fact I'd sit in the big windows there just reading for hours and hours and hours, because it just felt comfortable and it felt relaxed. And libraries do have they're a relaxing place. I think even
they are. This King James I actually visited Hinchingbrooke House, and that was his favourite room. The library was his favourite room. Yeah.
Interesting. Perhaps King James I is still there and he's trying to entice you back.
He might be. He may
could
very
become
well
a princess, Gemma.
I doubt that very much, but can always dream.
So when's the next Hinchingbrooke visit for Fright?
It's actually on the 4th of November.
Okay.
So it's coming up quite soon.
And are there tickets still available if anyone wants to go?
Yes, there are tickets still available.
Wonderful.
So it's a really great event. It's a great place. It's a beautiful building, and we do usually get some kind of activity.
And it's not that heavily investigated, is it?
No, it's not. We did the first event at Hinchingbrooke House. It is actually an exclusive venue for us. Okay. They do the other ghostly thing that they do at Halloween is the horror at Hinchingbrooke, the live event.
Oh yeah.
They do that outside the house, but we're the only group that actually investigate the inside of the house.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one is. So how often do you tend to go back there?
We go there twice a year.
Twice a year.
So okay. So usually in March and November.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think that sort of that's an interesting sort of. It's nice to hear about places that aren't scary, that are just they're active, but not in an intimidating or a malevolent or a nasty way. Although I am intrigued to know what these tunnels possibly were used for and how old they actually are, and also those bones, whether they were ever carbon dated or whether they've just left them. Because I was thinking about the lids on the coffins could have just been a wooden lid that just deteriorated, but why were they under the stairs? That's quite that's quite strange.
There's lots of unanswered questions, I think. There's lots more to find out about Hinchingbrooke.
More questions to ask next time you go back.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Well, it's been fascinating, especially with the music links and everything else. The fact you've heard singing, the fact it was a music book, the fact that, we the only real sort of dramatic death was the murder of Martha Ray, albeit in London, but that's where she was happy and she lived with her kids and everything else. It wouldn't be surprising if she had come back. It'd be interesting to ask if that's her. Next time, maybe. Let me know. let me know if you get any answers to that. So thank you. So what have you got coming up over the next couple of months that people can book onto? You're saying we've got the next Hinchingbrooke one is the 4th of November.
That's the 4th of November. Yeah. We have got Calvin Hatchigan coming up in December.
Right. And
Peterborough Museum. We've got that coming up in December as well.
Okay. So quite a few bits that people could have a look at, and then the weekend. When's the first Colchester B&B weekend?
That is the first weekend in February.
Okay.
Yes.
That sounds interesting. That sounds a different one to do. Lots of. So, I was interested with the Colchester one. How are you gonna? Are people gonna say, right? You can do you're gonna literally go from the castle to Holly Trees on the same night, or can people almost choose where they want to go?
We're going to go. The first night's actually at the town hall,
right?
And then the second night is split between the castle and Holly Trees Museum.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. And how close is the Red Lion to all of these? Is it walking distance?
It's all within walking distance.
Okay.
The town hall is literally it's on the high street, across the road from the hotel. Mm-hmm. So it's a 5-minute walk, and then the castle and the museum are maybe 10-minute walk, but it's all in close proximity. So
okay.
Park up for the weekend, and you can
enjoy the spookiness that Colchester has to offer.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great place.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for your time, Gemma. I really appreciate it. You're getting to be a bit of a pro at this interview lark now, aren't you? Is this your second one?
Thanks.
You see what you can come back next year and talk through for us. Maybe one of these new venues that you and I are talking about, we can do something on one of them, as they won't have been talked about very often. And no, I won't. I promise I won't tell anyone where they are.
I'm trusting you.
Yeah, I know I won't. I promise.
No,
yeah,
I know.
They can put the thumb screws on me. They can shine the light in my face. I'm not telling anyone.
You'd enjoy that, though, wouldn't you?
Shh. We're still on air. Shush. As long as they force feed me Haribo at the same time, it's fine. Anyway, thanks ever so much for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. And please do go to Gemma's Facebook page, Fright Nights Cambridgeshire. Have a look at the places she's got on offer. Do like the page. And if you've got any questions for her, just pop her a message, and she's very responsive, and she'll come back to you. But all that leaves me to say is thank you ever so much for listening to Haunted Histories tonight on Parasearch Radio. Don't forget, we have shows on every night of the week, all of which can be caught after the event via Spreaker or YouTube. Tomorrow night is the KTPF show, and then on Friday we've got the Dark Mirror show with Kerry, Mark and Kaz, and they're going to be discussing the recent Sage Paracon event with Carl Hutchinson. Next week I'm going to be talking to Anita of Ghostly Goings On about the infamous Woodchester Mansion, so that'll be a good one as well. But all that leaves me to say is have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.